I call the Honourable Assistant Treasurer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, it's very hard to take the member for McMahon and Labor seriously when the member for McMahon said on ABC Radio on the 13th of May 2010, the government has returned the budget to surplus 3 years ahead of schedule and ahead of any other major advanced economy. Madam Speaker, I don't know what he was drinking that night, but it wasn't ouzo, I can tell you. He was a professor of ouzo economics. Now, Madam Speaker, we have produced a budget which will set up Australia for the future, a budget that capitalises on the green shoots in the Australian economy, a budget which sees us seize the opportunities out of the free trade agreements that we have signed in the region with Japan, South Korea and China, with the more than $2 billion of red tape that we have cut, and with the abolition of the carbon tax and the mining tax. The key themes running through this budget are really three. The first is its focus on small business and jobs. When it comes to jobs, we want to target those young people who are neither in education nor in employment. We want to work with groups like the Brotherhood of St Lawrence to actually help them get a job and start working for an income. We also want to give them work experience, and one of the programs we have is to subsidise employers to take on young people for up to 25 hours a week for 4 weeks, and while those young people also retain their income support. And another job program in this budget is about accelerating the payments to employers through a $1.2 billion wage subsidy pool, for example with the Restart program, which will see people aged over the age of 50 get into the workforce after they've been on income support. And we will provide up to $10,000 to an employer who does that. And what about the package for small business? Small business will now get its greatest tax cut in over 50 years. It will see its company tax rate cut for companies with revenue under $2 million that are incorporated to 28.5%. And for unincorporated companies with revenue under $2 million, they will get a tax discount of up to 5%, up to $1,000 a year. And both incorporated and unincorporated companies will also get the benefit of this massive accelerated depreciation of up to $20,000 for 2 years. This is extremely significant to allow our small businesses to innovate and invest. And do you know that 8 out of every 10 jobs in agriculture in this country are in small business, and 9 out of every 10 small businesses that are investing in innovation and high technology are actually small businesses. And we on this side of the House understand that small business is the engine room of the Australian economy. Those on the other side of the House had a rotisserie of ministers in the small business portfolio, a rotisserie of small business ministers. You had 5 in just 6 years, rotating on the hot burn, as 517,000 jobs were lost in small business under Labor's watch. Shame on you. And there's also red tape abolition, for example, getting rid of the fringe benefits tax on portable electronic devices, no longer requiring companies to have an ABN, a tax file number, an Australian company number, now only needing one, as well as our initiatives around crowdsourced funding. And then the second big package of initiatives in this budget relates to families and particularly childcare. $3.5 billion worth of new funding, taking the Productivity Commission as our guide, with a sliding scale from 85% down to 50%, with a real focus on low and middle income earners. And we have tightened the activity test to ensure that the government is now only providing childcare to those families who are actually in work, because we understand if we can boost workforce participation, we can strengthen the Australian economy. And by our estimates and the department's estimates, some 240,000 families will either now enter into the workforce or stay longer in the workforce as a result of our measures. They'll also add $240 million plus initiative on nannies, which will provide 10,000 children and 4,000 nannies, focusing again on some of the less advantaged areas in our country as well as regional areas. And our $843 million commitment to 15 hours a week of universal access for preschool children. That's a signature set of policies, Mr Deputy Speaker, around childcare and families. And then the third leg of our budget, which we're so proud of, relates to multinational tax and to ensure that multinationals pay their fair share of tax. And what way we have done that is to strengthen Part 4A, the anti-avoidance provisions, to ensure that around 30 companies who the ATO have been looking at their artificial and contrived tax arrangements can ensure that the taxpayer in Australia, the mums and dads, the nurses and the doctors, are not shortchanged by these multinationals not paying their fair share. And we've doubled the penalties for breaches, and we've also ensured that the GST is applied consistently to the importation of intangibles like to companies like Netflix, to ensure that domestic providers of those services are now on a level playing field, Mr Deputy Speaker. So I'm very proud of those three sets of big initiatives, all around jobs and small business, all around families and childcare, and all around the strengthening of our tax system and its integrity. But on top of that, Mr Deputy Speaker, there's a record investment of $1.2 billion in national security, on top of the $1 billion we had already announced in our government for ASIO, for the Australian Federal Police, for our Defence Forces, because we know that ASIO has 400 high-priority investigations right now into terrorism-related events, and we know that our intelligence and our agencies and our law enforcement agencies are very focused on the fact that more than 20 Australians have gone over to Syria and Iraq where they're being killed, including a number as suicide bombers. And what about on health? We have also, rather than the opposition, we have also on this side of the House put an additional $1.3 billion worth of drugs onto the PBS system, including important drugs for melanoma, important drugs for cancer sufferers, because we know we have a moral obligation to assist those who are less fortunate than ourselves. And what about our changes to the pension? Again, it's ensuring a more fair and sustainable pension, because the pension, you're in denial. The member for Jagga who sits opposite is complete denial about the sustainability of the pension. It's the single largest budgetary item we have at $42 billion and growing at 6% per year, and currently now 10% of the Australian budget. And with the people over the age of 65 doubling between now and the next 40 years, we know we have to make the budget more sustainable, and our changes to the taper rates as well as to the asset-free areas have not only ensured that people who may have been on a part pension but on low amount of assets are now going on the full pension, but we've also saved $2.4 billion over the forward estimates through these measures. So I'm very proud of that. And then, of course, as the Treasurer and the Prime Minister have said today in the Parliament, our support for Northern Australia, our support for farmers, the $5 billion worth of concessional loans, the fact that you can actually instantly write off the fencing costs for those farmers, the fact that we're actually putting more money into mental health counsellors in drought-affected areas, together with $330-odd million worth of support for the drought-affected parts of our country. Madam Speaker, I'm very proud of all that. And in my last minute and a half, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to focus on one very important part of this budget, which is continuing the path of budget repair, continuing to pay back the debt and deficit that the Leader of the Opposition was completely ignorant about, who for 13 times on Neil Mitchell today avoided the simple question where he didn't take responsibility for your debt, because when you came into government in 2007, there was zero government debt. $50 billion in the bank and $20 billion worth of budget surpluses. Right. Mr Deputy Speaker, Labor had created this mess, and now they're refusing to support us as we fix up this mess. So we were borrowing $130 million a day to just pay their bills. Now we've brought it down to $96 million a day. This is despite writing down $90 billion worth of revenue as a result of falling commodity prices. We have brought spending growth down from 3.6% per annum that you created on the other side of the House to just 1.5% per annum over the forward estimates. That's even taking into account our major obligations and rightful obligations to fund the NDIS going further. And from a budget deficit that we inherited of $48 billion, it will be $35 billion next year. In 3 years' time, it will be $7 billion, and we will get to surplus over time. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, we have been left to collect to fix up Labor's mess. We're very proud of this budget. It sets up Australia for a very bright future.